Hello and welcome to another episode of the Sumer Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Parker Fleming, here again on a Wednesday doing some interviews, talking to some smart people across the internet that work in and around the world of football. And I have with me today my Twitter friend and hopefully soon real life friend, Brad Spielberger of PFF. Brad, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Yeah, I tried to wear purple to appease to you a little bit. It's not TCU purple, it's LSU, but I thought that would, ease our way into the conversation a bit.
I know that's wonderful, and certainly with the College World Series going on is an appropriate shirt to wear with LSU still being in. And I'll say this: I fully endorse going down rabbit trails. So we'll go down rabbit trails, and then I'll do some housekeeping. And we'll get into the interview. But TCU played LSU. I want to say 2011 or 12 in Jerry World. And I went, and I'm from SEC country, so I kind of knew what to expect. It was very funny watching my TCU friends get recalibrated, like, oh, we should not go up and talk crap to these LSU fans. Like, we should give them a wide berth and let them do their thing. And you kind of saw in real time that realization of like, oh, we are out of our league here for sure. So fun when the paths cross. So yeah, make sure if you're watching this, I can't imagine that you're not subscribed on YouTube or on Twitter or wherever else you subscribe to Sumer Sports and get all our good content. Make sure you do sign up at the newsletter. The newsletter is going to come out. We're getting not a petition. We're getting emails right now. So sign up for that on the website at Sumer Sports The Zone. You'll be the first to know about new stuff there. Under 2 minutes on the intro. Feel good about that. Even did a random LSU dive there. So let's get into it. Brad, again, thanks for being here. You are a salary cap analyst at PFF. So my first question is, tell us about what you kind of do on a day-to-day basis and your job kind of working in and around sports.
Yeah, so the day-to-day aspect of it is very different, which I frankly love, that component of it. So there are elements that are, of course, content, consumer-facing, writing articles, doing our free agent projections. All 250 of those come from myself. And then, not the write-ups, got to shout out some other people at PFF to help with that. But the numbers themselves come from a lot of work we've done using PFF wins above replacement, adjusting for things like age, draft status, injury history, all sorts of variables there. That's a big piece of it, but there also is a large element of working with our team clients, working with agent clients as well, in various different capacities. Probably can't go into super duper specifics, but what you'd imagine, right? I mean, there are these contracts we sometimes forget are 9-figure, 8-figure deals. They take months at a time. There's a lot that goes into them, a lot of language, a lot of back and forth. So we try to play a role and help either party in that situation. And then some research and data elements as well. Obviously, a lot of smart people over at PFF. And whenever the subject matter of contracts and the salary cap and asset allocation, things like that come into the fold, I try to offer help as much as I can.
I like to imagine, Brad, that the majority of your work takes place in a dark boardroom in the back, and everyone is dressed like a 1920s gangster and smoking a cigar. When you think about kind of how under the radar these agent and contract stuff are and negotiations are, it certainly does seem a little bit mystical at times. Okay, so you've been at PFF for a little bit now. Tell me about your background. How did you get to working in sports? What did you first start getting interested in? I think you had going to law school and saying, oh, maybe I could apply this to the NFL. Maybe this is a career I could pursue. If someone wanted to kind of see the track that you went on to see if that's a career they could try to pursue, well, tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. So I think like all of us obviously had the fascination with sports and the passion about sports. I'm a hockey guy growing up, but was a fan of, everything. And frankly, when I got to college, I, was an econ major in undergrad, but there were classes taught by a legendary professor who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago by the name of John Vrooman, but one of the pioneers of sports economics, has written papers, did interviews with, any website, or network you can imagine, and did a ton of awesome work. And I think that was the first time I realized, probably much to my parents' chagrin, like I can tie this sports fanaticism into a legitimate field and do kind of real advanced high level thinking, thinking things with the econ background tied into sports. So Once that concluded, knew I wanted to go to a business school or law school. And Tulane, for whatever reason, for a long time now, has had a phenomenal sports law program. Probably has something to do with Mike Tannenbaum going there, and they've had great professors. And Gabe Feldman now oversees the program. They run a Tulane pro football negotiation competition, which Sumer's own Tage Seth. I coached his team this past year. Essentially a mock trial or a mock negotiation between a fake team and a fake agent over a player. So anyway, long story short, once I got to law school, I knew I was going to do something related to sports. I would say probably a half dozen or more of the football administration folks at various teams probably came from Tulane sports law. That's not, I really don't think it's any coincidence. The program is very robust and very intense in what they want to do. And so, yeah, long answer short, I met Eric Eager and George Tahuri and a bunch of other guys at the Combine 3 years ago now. And here we are.
Awesome. Yeah, that's very fun. And I'll take this moment, since there's no one else on the podcast with us and can't bully me about it, to champion the economics degree and going with that in undergrad. It's like I don't 100% know what I want to do, but I know I want to learn how to think sharply about things and apply in my intellect and reason to a lot of different ways to go. There are certainly worse degrees than you could do getting economics as a foundation there. And kind of moved on from there. Very, very interesting. I will say, notice a couple questions are in the chat. Please keep tossing those in. We'll get to those at the end. So I see them, and I'm not ignoring them. We'll get to them at the very end. Awesome, Brad. Okay, so looking at salary cap, obviously there's a lot of tension in kind of the negotiations, and there is a strategery, if you will, kind of aspect of this of figuring out, okay, I want to reveal information to the player, but I don't want to reveal too much, and knowing that there is some kind of market making as I'm talking about all this. When you approach teams or you write articles, how do you feel like you uniquely think about a contract negotiation or valuing a player in terms of cap dollars that kind of makes your approach distinctive?
Yeah, so I think it's probably tying in both of those degrees there. So first, you mentioned the Econ Foundation. I think I do come back to a bunch. You have to understand you're in a monopsony or single buyer market for these player services. Obviously, the XFL and other things are cropping up. But if we're being realistic, there are 32 teams, 32 employers, if you will, in this situation. And frankly, you got me? And frankly, the number is much lower than that, right? Because of scheme fit or who can actually afford the player or who wants the player. So anyway, using all those things, and then it gets into, right, like if you're spending a bunch on a certain unit, can you afford to spend more on that unit? Do you want to instead invest elsewhere? And yada, yada, yada. So a lot of kind of simple economic principles there. As it relates to, kind of negotiation. So I was on the arbitration, the ADR team, which is alternative dispute resolution at Tulane. And I think you learn a ton of things, anchoring and some of the simple things you probably hear about that are more layman's terms, but just different ways to go about conversations. Obviously, you're going to tie to stats. You're going to tie to, like I mentioned, player age and injury history, and their draft capital is kind of always going to carry with them, and their measurables and combine performance and stuff like that. So I think really what matters is being able to take a million different variables and kind of, sandwich it all together to come up with a true number that helps out. The last piece I'll say is, and we'll get into this a little bit, the big numbers you see in the media, the total value, the average per year, stuff like that, that's probably ironed out earlier than the language. And that's where the law degree comes in, right? Where you want to protect your player or protect your club, the forfeiture of guarantees or, voiding guarantees or all these various different mechanisms that come into play for various different reasons. So that's kind of the last piece where understanding this is negotiating an 8 or 9 figure deal. Yes, it's a player contract for a sport, and I think that kind of makes us tweak our brain a little bit, but it's just a big contract between two entities.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly one thing I'm interested in is how kind of advanced metrics, and as analytics are a little bit more prevalent in the game, and as we're thinking about how we're thinking about the game, how have you seen, if at all, contracts and contract negotiations shifting and responding to, we have player tracking data, right? We have, usage statistics. We can say, hey, you're Jerome Bettis. Yes, I know you have 100 touchdowns, but they average 2 yards. We have to think about what that looks like for our backfield. How do we negotiate a contract? Have you seen a lot of evolution as those analytics have become more prevalent in the game in tying those to contracts, or in how teams or players try to solidify their position in a negotiation?
Yeah, so I think this is a fascinating question that I can answer a number of different ways, but I frankly do think
Don't give out the secret sauce for sure. You can draw a fence
oh.
wherever you need to.
No, not even so much thinking that, but I'll say I've had a couple conversations, frankly, more with non-NFL front office people, and they, they wonder, do you think there has been more usage of data in on-field play versus in these things like roster construction, like a lot of what you guys are trying to do? In my opinion, I think we've seen more adoption on fourth down decisions and things like that than frankly we have in some of the front office mechanisms. Of course, you're going to see, right now the running back market is going through a massive contraction. The nerds, quote unquote, aren't solely responsible for that. But, let's be honest, there's a reason why that's happening, right now. At the same time, though, two guys went in the top 12 in the draft. So, it kind of goes both directions. But anyway, I love this question because the player tracking thing comes up a bunch. The 2021 CBA, you're actually not allowed to talk about player tracking data in a contract negotiation, which might sound silly at first. I think it makes a ton of sense. If you're a player that's going to go to practice in his building, agree to have an RFID chip in your shoulder pads, and then you're going to go to negotiation, they're going to say, well, you weren't running that fast last Tuesday. Like, it's just, I think it's very invasive.
You didn't sleep well enough last night. We're not going to pay. Yes, and it can only be used against the player, I think, for sure.
For sure. But I would say on the more advanced stats, look, no one's kind of, I think, right now in a negotiation talking about like, oh, well, your guy's EPA per dropback was this, that, the other. But definitely we're moving away from, like you said, total yards and touchdowns and a lot of volume stats, or, just purely sacks, like things like that. We're getting there. But I'll tell you, I think there is still a lot of room for growth for these conversations to be much more advanced and not just looking at traditional stats.
Yeah. And I wonder about the asymmetry. Do you feel like, insofar as you can answer, do you feel like coaches or agents have outpaced one another at times? Is it a constant race? Is it a seesaw? Or are they generally in line with kind of how they're thinking about how these contracts should be made? Or is it, unique to agents, how it happens?
Yeah, I think it tends to be unique. Of course, the teams are going to have more resources at their disposal. Obviously, we kind of try to bridge the gap for a lot of folks in that regard. But I think maybe that's also why the agents aren't necessarily going to push so hard in that round, because the teams might counter and say, okay, you want to play hardball and talk about a bunch of, super advanced metrics. We'll get our six, football technology people on it and come up with a bunch of different ways why, we think your guy is not worth that much, and you can counter at your pleasure. And then those agencies, even the biggest and best ones, aren't probably going to have the resources and the manpower to kind of push back on that. So, yeah, but I do think it varies. I think others are very interested in this and, looking more at, obviously the big one too is like just simply adjusting some data or adjusting for the market based on the year and kind of still simple stuff. But again, getting away from just kind of looking at hard, like hard and fast numbers instead of kind of the context that plays around every situation. It's obviously the game is so convoluted. It's hard to boil things down to one number.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so fascinating to me, and I think I could keep going down. I just hear stories about like negotiations and how tense they are, or creative ways that people have gotten to them. But I do want to kind of move into, let's talk about the league a little bit more broadly, and just some stuff that kind of that you see around. So I think the first question you have to ask when you have a salary cap expert on the show, the first one you have to ask is, Brad, I've been told many times that the salary cap's not real, that money's not real, and teams can do whatever they want. They can always find a way around things. And how real is the salary cap?
So the answer that I've kind of come back to a bunch of times now, and I know this sounds a little bit weird, but what I say is, look, the salary cap is real. The player contracts that make up the salary cap are often fake, right? Or are so manipulable. I'm not sure if that's a word, that it's like I can see why people get to the conclusion teams can do whatever they want. They can restructure deals. They can cut a bunch of players, yada, yada, yada. And in some, it appears as though there isn't actually a constraint. I will say this, look. The cap is not as much of a constraint as the owner's budget, at a very simple level. But also, when you tell me the cap is fake, with all due respect, go look at the Rams depth chart and then tell me the salary cap is fake. Like, it's obviously eventually going to catch up to you. I think it's a credit card, right? It's not a debit card. It's a credit card. And that's, I think, the easiest kind of way to put it.
Yeah. No, and that makes sense. And I think this is one of the few areas few of many areas where the public sees a little bit, and behind the scenes, a whole lot is going on kind of below the tip of the iceberg there. So it is always kind of funny to see, dogmatic opinions about, oh, it's not real, they can do whatever they want. And you're like, well, there are kind of some examples where very clearly you're constrained by it, but it does make the puzzle more interesting. It does make roster building kind of a more interesting exercise. Along those lines, Brad, as you've kind of encountered, because you live at a really interesting nexus, kind of a line between what's going on behind the scenes and a lot of public facing stuff, seeing people's opinions, commenting on that. What are some common misconceptions about the salary cap, about the way contracts are laid out, about what players expect that you see people making or having, and how can we correct those?
Yeah, I would say a couple of the top. So first, I think, and especially now as we're getting more and more into this, self-represented world, and players are more involved in a lot of these things, I'm not sure people realize how far apart a lot of these negotiations start. Like, it's not, and I think it's kind of silly. Some teams I think are better at it than others, but you might think, oh, why are they in this contract dispute, or why did this player get pissed off at the initial offer? I can promise you the vast majority of the time, if a player is pissed off about an offer, they probably have a good reason, and they feel disrespected and slighted, and it's probably not a crazy reaction to that. So I think that's the first thing. And the second thing for me is, for whatever reason, I think it's easier in a lot of people's minds to say, look, this guy plays a sport. He plays a game we all love. They're making so much money now. Why are they nickel and diming over these amounts, whatever? The earning window for the average NFL player is so short. It's realistically one veteran contract. That's a good career outcome. Is you get one deal beyond your rookie deal, you're already probably in the 70th percentile, 80th percentile of just all contractual financial outcomes. So I think that's a big one as well. I mean, yeah, I could ramble on this for days, but I think the last piece probably is that, kind of on the flip side, I think a lot of times people get confused by moves sometimes. They'll say, oh, well, this guy is still a good player, and they view things very, in a very binary sense. Value is key, right? I mean, the salary cap, again, like, it is a constraint in that there's an opportunity cost to every single thing you do. And if a player is still good, but is not worth the, money he's scheduled to be paid, when they get cut, like DeAndre Hopkins didn't get cut for salary cap reasons. It's irrelevant. They didn't want to pay him $19.5 million. Now, of course, the context of their roster and all that as well. But so often people say, oh, they wanted to clear cap. Like, they probably just thought the production of this guy in this year was not worth the cash outlay. So I think focus on cash more often. We get bogged down a little bit in the salary cap.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good lead into, we have a question here that I think I'll toss in here from sorry, I'm a boomer. It takes me a minute to get the question up there. The Cardinal Rule asks, hi, Brad, can you talk about cash over cap? How much of an effect does it have on competitive balance? Is the league looking at limiting it? So one, if for people who might not be familiar with they're asking about cash over cap, can you explain what they're asking about for those who might know? And then answer or tackle this question.
Sure. So realistically, I mentioned the credit card aspect to the salary cap. So we get bogged down again in looking at a static single number for the 2023 salary cap, right? So it's 225 million plus teams can carry over excess from last year, but nevertheless, let's just say 225 million. You can spend, look, the Cleveland Browns and Buffalo Bills are spending over $300 million in cash in this season. They've just spread the cap hits out because you can spread cap up to 5 years on the salary cap through prorated bonuses, signing bonus, option bonus, or you restructure a contract. All the restructure means is you take salary that is currently all hitting in the current year, and you spread it out up to 5 years. So that's what we mean by cash over cap. You can spend a lot more than the salary cap in that given year and reduce a bunch of cap hits to fit more cash. Like I said, two teams are over 300 million already at this point. And that, again, that is the constraint. That's what matters more. Obviously, it all has to hit the cap at some point, but you can obviously manipulate that to a pretty extreme degree.
And how sharp are teams on this? How sharp are teams at figuring out, okay, I know that my Super Bowl window is this. I know that we're going to try and compete here. So we're going to spread it so we can have the most cash, here and spread this out. How good are they at kind of identifying those waves of competition and maximizing kind of the strategy behind spreading out the cash versus the cap hits?
Yeah, I think some are very good, and obviously some are not quite as good. I'll say kind of two. I'll use the Eagles in both directions. Look, I think the Eagles probably have the best football administration department in the NFL. When the GM Howie Roseman comes from that background, you're probably going to be showing up pretty well in that regard. But look, I think they do a very good job of knowing when to spend, like you said, the ebbs and flows of all right. We have a rookie contract, Jalen Hurts, so we can go out and get an AJ Brown, and we can go out and do these things, and add more talent. They also, in my opinion, do the best job of signing guys to early extensions, which is how you get good value. I mean, Josh Sweat at $14 million per year, Jordan Mailata at $16 million per year. That's how you go get an AJ Brown and fit him with a Jalen Hurts. Bring back a lot of their free agents, yada yada. So on the flip side, though, look, I do think Howie Roseman's a genius in a lot of ways, but when I see the tweets come out that are like, look at how low Jalen Hurts cap hits are, Howie Roseman's a financial wizard. Any GM can realistically just prorate a bunch of money, use that credit card, push a bunch of money down the line. Again, it's a great structure. A lot of what they do, the language they use, stuff like that, I read it and I don't read it in any other contracts, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to prorate money in a deal. The Saints, again, I think they are a well-run team, no question about it. Kai Harley, also a bit of a wizard in his own right, but I think we sometimes go too far too. And it's like, yeah, I mean, like any GM could do this. The Raiders GM would probably love to do this, but I'm not sure Mark Davis would sign off on prorating a bunch of money and spending, $80 million above the salary cap. So always remember, it comes back to ownership. It comes back to other constraints besides just, maneuvering cap hits.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Brad, hold on to your seat for this one. Speaking of not needing a rocket scientist, you don't need a rocket scientist for is grooming, taking care of yourself, keeping things clean. Manscaped.com. You can go and get anything that you need for grooming, appliances, utilities, everything that one could possibly need to get groomed at Manscaped.com. You can use code SUMER SUMER for a discount at the checkout. So make sure you go check that out and take care of yourself with Manscaped code SUMER. In and out really quick. I'm getting good at these, man. I feel good about it. But okay, so I think talking about the Eagles, bringing up Jalen Hurts and the fact that they just signed him to a contract that does feel, I think, to an average fan, a little bit of wizardry, just in how odd it seems on the, there's a big number, but then there's a small number, and how do they do all that? But I think a question I have for you is a trend that we're kind of seeing is that the rookie contract is like one of the most valuable advantages you can have. Can I get a guy who can be on a rookie contract and let me build around him in a way to get to the Super Bowl? You look at what Brock Purdy did with amazing circumstances, and not to say Brock Purdy's a bad quarterback, but I think that no one is dreaming at night of how they can get a Brock Purdy and build a dynasty around him, but he can get in there and pass this sufficient threshold of talent. How do you foresee this recent kind of success of these rookie quarterbacks and how valuable they've been changing the way contracts are negotiated? Will teams start overpaying more in second contracts because a guy, effectively took a discount just by being a rookie? Will teams try to troll through quarterbacks and move faster? What do you think is going to happen there as we've seen the value and the surplus value of the rookie quarterback rise?
Yeah, I think it's effectively the biggest surplus value advantage in the NFL by a country mile right now. And you mentioned Mr. Irrelevant and Brock Purdy, even a Jared Goff, the number one overall pick. You get him with the Rams, and look, he's gonna be a surplus value over the $8 million a year he was making on his first overall pick contract from 2016. So I want to say the stat is from 2011, the beginning of the rookie wage scale, through last year. I think there's been 2 Super Bowls that didn't feature at least one rookie contract quarterback because. Yeah, I mean, you're saving $30 or $40 million per year on these players, and then you can go out and spend so much talent elsewhere. And then even if Jared Goff is only, let's say that year in 2018, he was a top 15 quarterback, when you have so much talent elsewise, because you have all the money, you can build a really good team. So I'll tell you this, we're obviously now a decade away from the next CBA, but there were already some conversations last time around if we're going to try and treat quarterback contracts differently. And I know the fans of, I'm a Bears fan, these teams that have expensive quarterbacks crying about how hard it is. Boo-hoo. I would love to pay a quarterback a ton of money in Chicago once in my lifetime. Sounds awesome. But anyway, so they already are having conversations of can we treat things differently? Can we do different things? Because there are some clubs that think it's such an advantage right now to have it. So to your second part of the question, and I think this is the thing where an owner's incentives or maybe a full club's incentives to win differs from, frankly, the incentives of a GM to keep his job. And that's always going to be a ton of tension there. But again, with all due respect, maybe I'm wrong, but the Daniel Joneses and Derek Carrs and these mid-tier quarterbacks that are good players. I'm not saying they're not. They are top 20, top 15 quarterbacks, but take another bite at the apple, taking another swing, trying to take a draft pick instead of doing that. Someone's eventually going to do it. I don't know who is going to take that risk. It probably will need to be an entrenched general manager that has the confidence to say, hey, if I whiff on this pick, maybe I'll get another. But that's the issue, is that these guys just, I'm not blaming them. Like, you kind of have to, if you make the playoffs with a guy, you probably are going to keep him. It's just so often we then see that second tier of pay guys, they still get paid close to the top. And then the team can't spend enough to win around them because they're now providing negative, there's zero surplus value on their deal.
Yeah, which is hard because I think there's absolutely exists sort of like a warm glow effect from signing your franchise quarterback, right? Like when you pay that guy the money, you get to pop the champagne with the owner. Everybody's smiling. We're saying we got our guy. This is awesome. But then you have to go down with the ship when the surplus value kind of changes and things inevitably descend into madness and whatever. And it's very hard. I think we had I was talking to Kevin Cole a couple of weeks ago on this very show, and he was talking about, he'd written an article about the principal agent problem and kind of formalized pretty well just the idea that like the long run horizons of building a team and the short run temperament's too harsh a word, but you know what I mean, of owners do not align in terms of optimizing team building, because if your quarterback misses, you're done. Like that's just the end of your tenure there. And that's really hard, knowing that you've got to hit the quarterback, but also if you don't build around the quarterback, you're going to suffer as well. It feels like a very, very difficult problem, perhaps even underestimated in its difficulty to put together a team in such a way. Let's pivot a little bit from the, I keep waving my hand. I'm sorry if you're watching on YouTube, you see this, my camera's too high def for my hands moving. And so when I put my hand up, it changes the focus. Sorry. Let's pivot away from the vague kind of rookie quarterbacks. Let's talk specifically about a couple quarterbacks. And I'm going to put two in a bin and ask you a question, and maybe they're the same, maybe they're not, but Daniel Jones and Kirk Cousins. Daniel Jones just got signed off the rookie contract, got paid a bunch of money. Kirk Cousins contract looming. What are they going to do? Will they, won't they with the Vikings? And kind of some questions they've had about this offseason and what they would ultimately end up doing. How do you approach the idea of the good enough quarterback? Like there is this idea that Daniel Jones might not be the best quarterback that we could ever get if we could draft someone else, but we have a team that's built right now. We might compute. How do we do the calculus of, should we sacrifice to secure the known of quarterbacks so that we can build around him versus trying to take another swing at another quarterback?
Yeah, so in this specific situation, and you can, say if you think it's a good idea or not, but realistically, I think the reason he didn't just get franchise tagged is because they wanted to franchise tag Saquon Barkley. And so, basically as a result, he gets a, 4-year, $160 million contract simply because they wanted to slap a tag on Barkley. So for me, what I do is I go year to year. I mean, we'll get to Kirk Cousins in a second, but, Washington obviously hasn't been super successful since, they let Kirk Cousins walk. But to a degree, you could argue they got the most value they could get out of Kirk. They were kind of a fringe playoff team, a 10-win team. You kind of, you're right in the hunt. And they said, this is probably the ceiling of this guy. So why would we pay him near top of market? Let's just try to hit the thing again. And of course, they have not done particularly well in that regard. Minnesota's been a playoff team a couple times. Obviously, a high scoring offense. He's been good. He probably gets made fun of a little bit more than he should. But yeah, so to the Daniel Jones point, if that was me, look, I didn't draft him if I'm that general manager in New York. But here's the thing, we also talk about how short careers are. I think Dexter Lawrence is a phenomenal player. I think Andrew Thomas is one of the best young left tackles in football. I think Kayvon Thibodeau started to show flashes last year. You have this nucleus of really, really good young players. Some of those guys, two guys I mentioned, still on rookie deals. There also could be, if we don't do something and if we go into the quarterback wasteland, then we could just waste all these guys' careers. So it's like the principal agent problem is a lot tougher than, our armchair GMs think. But yeah, I don't know. For me, I wouldn't be afraid to do it. But the issue now is, quarterbacks basically realize they run these teams, that they do. And they have so much leverage and power that they kind of can say, okay, well, if you don't pay me, I'm going to cause problems. And it tends to work out that they get a new deal.
Yeah. And I think One thing that I'm interested to see how the market ends up adjusting, in 5 to 10 years, is that the asymmetry of like quarterback power now. And I mean, we're going to see more offensive coordinators being hired and fired because they've paid the quarterback and they want to figure out, do you like this guy? And look at what Aaron Rodgers was able to do to say, this is the team I want around me. And the Jets, made it happen. And signing those guys, it's interesting to see kind of the framework and the asymmetry of the power. Speaking of Saquon, speaking of the franchise tag, I might leave this open ended and then ask a question. What's going on with the state of running backs and contracts right now? Why are we seeing such odd things happening? Why are we seeing such a discrepancy between, I'd say, public, not necessarily public analytical perception, but public perception and team perception with, Ezekiel getting cut, with these guys getting franchise tagged, not getting paid, despite putting up big numbers last year?
Yeah, so I sort of alluded to this earlier because from my perspective, and I think this is where the contract, foundation for me comes in. Adrian Peterson and Chris Johnson signed deals for $14 million per year like a decade ago, right? And then the contraction of the market happened well before. And then look, Zeke and McCaffrey did kind of break through that glass ceiling and get $15 million per year and $16 million per year respectively. But we already kind of were seeing a downward trend at the position, but now it looks like it's approaching rock bottom, frankly. I mean, I'm not sure Saquon Barkley or Josh Jacobs are going to get $14 million a year. And Ezekiel Elliott signed his extension in 2019, which is 5 years ago, which for every other position, the market's probably doubled since that time. And now we're talking about a guy that if the Giants offered Saquon Barkley, again, as we talked about, the structure matters, the guarantee matters, all that. But I would imagine if they even offered him just below Zeke's 15 5 years later, he'd probably sign it excitedly. Like we're just not there. So it really boils down to, if you look at the success rate, however you want to define success, of second contracts for running backs at the top of the market, there's close to zero hits. And the crazy thing with the recent developments is, look, I think Zeke, he got to the end of the road. He played a couple of years in the deal. Dalvin Cook, you can make a lot of arguments. He was 1,000-yard, 8-touchdown, and again, those are volume stats. But for us, his explosive rushes, he was second in explosive rushes the last 3 years. He was top 15 in forced missed tackles per carry. He did this past season have a much lower success rate, but I think you could probably argue, he didn't want to take hits because he had a dislocated shoulder that he's popped out of place like 10 times. So even the success stories are still getting cut. My long answer short is, we talked about, the CBA and different parties. If I'm running backs, I'm saying I will not sign a CBA in 10 years from now where the rookie deal is 4 years long plus a 5th year option, because I may never see a legit second contract again.
Yeah, that does lead in, and you kind of answered my question. Was going to say, if this is a problem, which I think it's a value statement to say it is or isn't. So let's just say if it is a problem, what are some ways that the league could innovate to change that? And I thought one of the ideas you'd probably bring up is a kind of position specific minimum, and say, like, we know that, like, the life cycle, I don't know if the CBA would be able to get this creative, but like, we know the life cycle of certain players is different, so we're gonna change the minimum. How much freedom do you think the CBA has, or the Players Association has, to get creative and innovate when this new, as they're thinking about what a dream CBA would be to kind of rectify some of these problems?
Yeah, it does open, I think, a large can of worms, which probably is why both parties want to avoid it. I mean, just for example, like Jimmy Graham a couple of years ago going to arbitration to try to be a wide receiver when he got franchise tagged. I'm sure guys like Mike Gesicki probably would love to have the same argument, because he joked on that Twitter video that it was big slot receivers day when someone said happy tight ends day. Like, there's also off-ball linebackers now get tagged the same as 3-4 outside linebackers, so they benefit. Centers and guards get the same franchise tag as tackles, so they benefit. So, like, there's so many kind of weird, different, positions for different position markets to take, but it'll be tough, right? I mean, getting this bargaining unit on the same page, even ignoring positions, just getting, your bottom of roster guys to have the same goals and incentives as your top of roster guys. Like, if you're the 52nd guy on the roster, why would you care about the franchise tag at all? Right? It impacts you 0%. Whereas if you're a top guy, obviously, and even if you're just below a top guy, that franchise tag is also suppressing your value as well. But anyway, long answer short, if I had the answer to that, I'd be running against DeMaurice Smith in the next, NFLPA president poll coming up here soon. But if I was a running back and I was 14 years old, I'd be running routes or doing something different. That's my answer.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like I can think of one specific, and I'm sure everyone can think of like a backup or secondary running back at the college level, where you were like, dude, go play defensive end. I know you want the ball in your hand, but you will get paid on the other side of the ball. And I think we'll see some of that. I mean, we see guys like you mentioned, Kayvon Thibodeau, like just freak athletes saying like, oh, I can go be an edge and be the best at it, and I don't need to have the ball in my hands to get paid or be a dominant force on the field. So definitely, some slow evolution there. Let me scroll really quickly through some questions. I think I'll throw this to you. This is, how much money can the NFL get for placing company logos on player jerseys? I'll say, Brad, how much do you think teams are exploring alternative advertisement options like this? Is this something they're just champing at the bit to doing, and players are saying, no, not unless we get a certain cut? How's all that all happening right now?
Good question. I mean, they're obviously like all revenue streams, but I also do think they're big on legacy and the the shield and all these things. I would have to look at what NHL teams or obviously KHL teams make and other sports leagues make. I would imagine they can make a whole lot of money. They do it for practice jerseys. I want to say, like, you see an ad on the for the the jerseys they wear in camp, but I don't want to give a bad number, but I'm sure it's a large number.
Yeah. Same person. Another question that I think is interesting. Why are escrows still a thing for guaranteed money? I think this is a mechanical question that maybe you could provide some insight to the average fan with.
For sure. This is an issue that I think, again, will be negotiated in the next CBA and maybe will change. And so it's funny because kind of just an interesting anecdote about the lifespan of a league where the escrow rule was originally put in to protect players. Simply that they didn't know early on in the stages of the NFL if owners were going to go bankrupt or the league was going to go defunct and they were not going to get paid money they were owed. So they said, okay, make it a rule that owners that put money aside in an escrow account if there are future fully guaranteed dollars that they owe us. And so now we've gotten to a point where obviously every owner can afford these deals. And the franchise valuations are going up, billions of dollars in offseason. But essentially, that's why it's originally in there. Now the owners get to use it as a crutch and say, hey, I'd love to give you more fully guaranteed money in year 3 or year 4, whatever, but I don't have the liquidity to put this cash in escrow. And I'll be honest. Look, they're all wealthy. If the Denver Broncos or Rams owner said that, I would laugh in their face. If the Bengals owner told me he didn't have cash to put in escrow, he might not be lying to me, right? So anyway, that's why it's there, and it's a big issue.
Yeah, interesting kind of look at the mechanical stuff. And yeah, there's some element of like these guys are, rich owners and have a lot of flexibility, but also super wealthy and have their money in a lot of places. And there are like actual there are no cash constraints and none of that. Great. Okay, Brad, looking at our time, I don't want to keep you too long. And so kind of as we're here, I'll put out a call again. If you're watching and have a question for Brad, toss it in the comments. I'll absolutely get to it. While we're looking at that and here wrapping up, what do you see, Brad, as one or two of kind of the big inefficiencies in the contract market in the NFL right now? And what is your weirdest idea for here's what the NFL should do next that would help, fix one of these problems?
Yeah, it's again a tough one because I think again I'm kind of sitting on a high horse, so to speak, or being
I'm totally putting you on the spot. I sent Brad questions and did not send him that question. So, take that with a grain of salt as he answers here. I'm totally putting him on the spot.
No, all good. It's kind of been on my mind. So you're giving me a little bit of soapbox opportunity. So feel free to, tell me to shut up if I go too long. But like, I think right now there's an inefficiency, and I mentioned draft status tying into contracts. It does. There's no argument. If you get taken early, even if you're a worse player than a guy who got taken in the 4th round, you went in the 1st round, you might get more money on your second deal. You have added leverage because you've made more money, so you probably are not at much of you're not pressured to get a deal and avoid, an injury, a franchise tag, etc. But I think that still has an outsized effect on deals. And the flip side, the counter to my kind of own argument there is, like we talked about, the principal agent problem of being a GM. Like if you make a good draft pick, you're going to want to pay that guy, right? Look, I made a good pick a couple years ago. I'm showing you how good it was because he's getting a top of market deal and yada, yada, yada. So I think that's one for me for sure. I mean, there's so many. I could spend all day on it, but I think that's kind of like a big one right now is just like, it's very tough to untether yourself from your original perception, what people thought of you coming out, and it works in both directions. And I think some smart teams are kind of realizing that, getting some later picks signed earlier, getting good deals done, and they're willing to let their earlier guys walk and not kind of double down into a sunk cost is probably the wrong way to put it, but just double down on an evaluation. Look, I got it wrong, and I'm going to move on and admit my mistake, and that's okay.
Yeah. And interesting. I think Yeah, there's a lot there, but it is interesting, like the idea that like there are consequences, but then sometimes the consequences are I want to pay the guy more to show that I didn't make a mistake. And yeah, it's very, very, very interesting market. A couple more questions we'll get you, and then we'll get you out of here. Another one from the Cardinal Rule. What are your thoughts on some of the ideas proposed regarding QB contracts? For example, some have proposed sequestering QB contracts from the rest of the cap calculations, or kind of letting them exist outside just because they are so different in nature. Yeah, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so that's also what I was alluding to with the 2021 CBA negotiations. That was an idea that was at least broached. The subject, was kind of talked about. I think it never really advanced to any meaningful conversations. I mean, look, again, my perspective is skewed, but I would say boohoo. I don't care at all. I think that, you know what, if you get an awesome quarterback and you have to pay him a ton of money, you can figure out a way to make it work. We always hear this stat that gets thrown around, X percent of the cap went to their quarterback. And there's never been a team that spent 13.2% of their cap, whatever, and won the Super Bowl. So two things there. First, Patrick Mahomes just eradicated that stat this season. But secondly, less joking, you just zoom out to the conference championship game participants, which is still not zooming out that far. And all it is the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL. So I think it's totally bogus. I frankly think, again, with all due respect, a lot of former GMs go on the radio and make excuses for why they couldn't win once they paid guys. I think it's totally bogus. If you have one of the top 15 quarterbacks in the NFL, you have a massive advantage over everyone else. And if you're good at what you do, which I acknowledge is very, very difficult, you can draft good players around them. You can make smart financial decisions around them and not get sunk down by that big quarterback contract.
Yeah, absolutely. Another good one here from Beat Gamer 99 says, "What do you think about players becoming their own agents for the deals like Lamar and Tunzel? Do you think this is a trend moving forward or not?"
So, to a degree, yes. Look, I think it works in many ways and also is not a very good idea in a lot. So, first, if you're a Laramie Tunsil, a no-brainer top of market player, both times, he did the first extension and the second one, and for the first time, after getting traded for multiple first-round picks, yeah, you can negotiate your own deal because it's going to be top of market. You know that. You get a lawyer or advisor. In his case, St. Omni's done a lot of these to make sure, look over the language, to make sure you're protected from a legal standpoint for various other reasons, and you're probably okay. But I think, again, going back to maybe things people don't know, you could be a guy going into free agency, right? And you might know you have an offer for, let's say, around $10 million a year on the table. And let's say this team that's going to offer you that, all of a sudden a guy comes available they didn't expect, or a guy shows interest in them, and they say, you know what, we're going to pivot and give this guy $10 million a year instead. The guy that was going to make 10 from one team, he could make $2 million from the rest of the market. Like, it falls off so quickly, and we see these things happen every offseason. It's not it's not a stable market. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not logical. And I think it's very, very risky unless you are of the DeAndre Hopkins, Laramie Tunsil caliber, which is a very small pool of players. I think it's a pretty bad idea.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, it's interesting because it's like there's some nuance about like I'm not an agent or I'm my own agent, but like these guys are not unilaterally walking into the coach's or the GM's office and saying, let's sign up for a contract. Like, they're reviewing it and talking about this, and so there is a little bit of like technicality in that. But yeah, I think it does feel like guys are potentially leaving money on the table by trying to save money or do things independently, and it's a little rough. All right, we're running up on time. I've got two questions. I want to make a call. Let's do one, even though I'm very interested in this other question. Jimmy Dean says, void years have become popular as of late. Are there any other seldom used cap mechanisms you think could become more popular?
Yeah, I think we could see more of salary advances and option bonuses where with salary advances, and I won't get super in the weeds here, but essentially you can have money that prorates on your salary cap for you at the time you do it. But then, and unlike a signing bonus, when you trade that player somewhere else, you actually can recoup salary cap. It would come via a credit at the end of the season. Most of the time, you wouldn't get it right away. But I say that because, with a signing bonus, if you spread it out, it's stuck. That becomes dead cap. The void years, same thing. You push money into void years. If that player is gone, you are stuck with that no matter what. I think as more and more teams get creative with prorating money, frankly, and just being willing to push more money out, I think some of these mechanisms where you can actually recoup some of the salary cap space back will be more and more popular.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting and fascinating to have this whole kind of well of strategy ideas that guys can try to do and try to construct that perfect roster, that optimal, Super Bowl window roster there. Brad, we're coming up on time here. I'm going to go ahead and call it for us there. Thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed talking to you. Really enjoyed having you on. As evidenced by the influx of questions, I'm sure we could do this again and get back into stuff. So thanks for a little bit of time. Where can people find you, support you, read what you write, listen to what you put out?
Yeah, first, thank you so much for having me. This was awesome. And I'll try to answer as many questions as I can another time. So yeah, you of course can follow me on Twitter at PFF_Brad, posting articles, multiple articles a week over at PFF.com. And I still do contribute to the salary cap and contract website, the only one in existence, by the way, overthecap.com, which not only has the great data and all the contracts, but also you mentioned the void years question. Go search the term void years on Over the Cap, and you'll read 100 articles. So great website. Go check everything out there. And that's where you can find all my work.
Awesome. Yeah, I had in my notes to mention Over the Cap out loud and didn't do it. So thank you for doing that. Definitely check it out. That's Brad Spielberger of PFF. You can follow him on Twitter at PFF_Brad right there in the description. I'm Parker Fleming. This has been the Sumer Sports Podcast. Make sure you like, subscribe, go check out Manscaped to get a little bit of a discount, and we'll be back next week.